Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to our webinar. Before we begin, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to go through. If you can hear me okay, please use the raise hand option located on your control panel. Okay, great. There will be a recording of the webinar shared via email within 24 hours. Also, at the conclusion of today's session, there will be a short survey that pops up on your screen. If you don't have the time to complete it now, the survey will also be shared in that follow-up email. Before we start, we will kick off the webinar with a pre-presentation question just to get a sense of the audience. So if you take a look at your question panel, let me know, where in the world are you? All right, we got New York, Florida, Montana, so heavy US so far. California, we got someone from Canada, that's great. All right, we got a pretty wide spread across the US, in Tennessee, Indiana. Awesome, thank you very much. Just curious to see where you all are coming from. Throughout the webinar, we'll be conducting a few more polls, but in that case, the poll will pop up on your screen, and so when you're prompted, please choose the best answer to the question, and then we'll be able to show the results to the group. Lastly, if you have a question during the webinar, please use the same questions portion of your control panel to submit them. We'll answer the questions at the end of the webinar, but you can feel free to submit those throughout the session. So again, I thank you for joining us today for Teaching Social Justice with Credo. We'll be discussing the challenges of teaching social justice issues in a one-shot session and learn how librarians can incorporate scholarly resources like Credo when helping users learn how to navigate current events. Now I'd like to introduce our presenters. Joining us today, we have Raymond Pun, first-year student success librarian at California State University, Fresno, and Kenya Flash, political science, global affairs, and government information librarian from Yale University. Take it away, guys.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you, everyone, for joining this session. We are really thrilled to have you all be here on a Wednesday from all over the places that you're coming from. And hopefully you'll be able to be inspired and take some opportunities of some of the practices and examples we'll be showing today. And we really want to have this open discussion with everyone in a way that creates a lot of dialogue and just sort of approaches that might be unique or different in this really important topic. And we also wanted to say that we are not necessarily experts or like really deep specialists in this area. We are also learning, and we thought this was a great opportunity to demonstrate what we've been doing and share some of the important highlights that we see librarians can be working on. So again, want to thank Credo and Olga for introducing us. Again, I'm at Fresno State. This is Ray Pun. I work closely with first-year students, Summer Bridge, Upward Bound, our student affairs programs, and so forth.
And I'm Kenya Flash. I support political science, global affairs or international affairs, whichever way you look at it, and government information at Yale University.
And what we plan to do in this presentation is break it up into three parts. The first is looking at social justice in instruction, almost like a thematic way of addressing how and why instruction is a great opportunity to bring in the dialogue of social justice framework. The second aspect, we'll be looking at different kinds of activities for learning, what you can do using Credo that we've been doing, and to experiment, to attempt to create these dialogue and open spaces for social justice and inclusivity. And finally, we'll be reviewing some recommended readings. Some readings you might be familiar, some resources you might not be, and we hope to get some of your input as well, because I'm sure others have come across different materials that we may not have seen before. So looking forward to that part as well. So as Olga mentioned, where in the world are you? Really thrilled to hear so many people from all over the world. So we are gonna just jump right into the presentation part. So social justice in the library, you are probably wondering, for those who are really new and not familiar, wondering how do you bring this into your practice? Well, a lot of times I think we need to go back and connect to our library information science core values, which might include democracy, access, intellectual freedom, things that ALA, the American Library Association, espouses and endorses. And as librarians, we really need to think, how do those core values can really be played into the context of instruction, and how do they relate to social justice? So in some sense, we need to also think about the issues that are going on in the world and in society today. There's plenty of injustices we see in the news and events, and our students, our colleagues, they see it too. So how do we tie it all in and start having these critical dialogue and reflection about it? And what can we do to encourage that kind of thinking? So really thinking more broadly about these three themes, diversity, inclusivity, and social justice in the classroom, we find that this is a great opportunity to develop creative practice in teaching, but also thinking about how do you encourage students to think more broadly than just a research paper that's due for a class. Have them think more about these concepts and events that relate to issues that affect society and themselves and their own experiences. Particularly those in marginalized communities and those who have inequitable access and so forth. So I think it's a really good call to action approach where we are, as librarians, as educators, but also thinking closely of the work we do as supporting social justice.
Okay, so #CritLib. How do we, after this conversation, after this webinar, how do we stay in touch? How do we pay attention to the efforts and the movement of social justice in the libraries? #CritLib is an online Twitter discussion that happens several times a month sometimes, throughout the semester, throughout the year. I'm from an academic library, so I think in terms of semesters. But throughout the year, there are conversations. And for the organizers, this is the way they describe CritLib. CritLib is short for critical librarianship, and it's a movement of library workers dedicated to bringing social justice principles into our work in libraries. On their website, which is critlib.org, there is a map of where people are located, but there's also a calendar of when these conversations are taking place on Twitter. And some of the discussions that I've seen happen so far include discussions on what is happening with social justice in ALA, but also what happens with social justice in the classroom. And so it ranges not only from our work as professionals, but also our work in the classroom. Another way that we should be thinking about social justice in the libraries is thinking about how can we align our practice and our practicing principles to social justice. And I'm saying that because the ACRL framework, those are the guidelines that we've been given in the past few years to guide our instruction. And so I think there's, and this is my own personal view, that there are some frames that lend themselves to work better, to work a little easier with social justice than other frames. And one of these is the frame authority is constructed and contextual. When you're teaching that frame, most often, most people focus on scholarly versus not scholarly. But when you are teaching that frame with social justice in mind, you want to think about what are the contexts of the people who may be studied. What are the what would make this valid within that community? Is it valid in this community, or is their experience completely different from what is from the person who's writing about them? And what are other sources that could give a view that reflects not only the scholarly, but also the lived experience of people who are within that scenario.
And so we wanted to also bring up this document, the ACRL environmental scans that came out this past spring semester. And really, it's a interesting document that I encourage everyone to see if you haven't done so yet. They've done an excellent job in summarizing and capturing some of the trends, the emerging themes going on in academic libraries. And one of them is actually libraries and social justice. And that's where it inspired me to really think more about how to encourage my colleagues, the professional circles, in this really important topic. So they mentioned about having public dialogues. They even mention of a Twitter chat of sharing syllabus, or at least creating a syllabus based on Black women's experience, such as using Beyonce's Lemonade as a theme. And there's also addressing the lack of diversity in the profession, and how do we start thinking about that issue as well. But overall, it gives you this big picture of different kinds of topics and activities that you can consider. So I encourage everyone to take a look at this series of white paper.
So it's time for our first poll, and I was curious. We're curious to find out, have you ever organized your own Wikipedia-thon? If you can answer either yes or no. Okay, so we have 6% of you say that you have organized a Wikipedia-thon. 94% haven't, but we're going to go through the way that you could use Credo in a Wikipedia-thon.
Great, thank you so much for taking that poll. This is actually a great opportunity for you to think about how do you integrate reference materials and resources such as Credo into Wikipedia Editathon. For those who are not familiar with Wikipedia Editathons, it's actually a great opportunity where you can work with students, and whether it's a drop-in section or a embedded class assignment where students can learn to have access to Wikipedia and improve the Wikipedia entries. So you see here there are two flyers that came from Fresno State, something I organized for the library, and working closely, for instance, in different departments like English and Women's Studies, and then the other one more like Ethnic Studies and Asian American Studies, professors and students. And what we've done is that we've created these sessions where students come in, there's a theme, a topic, and then they start getting access to Wikipedia and using the reference materials to improve the sources out there. Because what we found, and you've probably heard, Wikipedia is typically not the go-to place for anyone to do like scholarly research, which is understandable. However, this is a public website that disseminates itself very rapidly, and people often use Wikipedia as first source to start citing things or start getting, exploratory knowledge. And what we want to do is make it better so it becomes more accessible with credible sources, and also with the students, how they understand this engagement process, that you can't just put things on the web and expect people to just understand as it is. There is a lot of lack of representation, not enough voices and experiences from the marginalized communities within Wikipedia. For instance, the 9066 is the executive order that President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed in sending, approving the incarceration or the removal of Japanese Americans to these camps, designated zones that later became camps. So what happened there? Well, there's definitely a system of oppression and racism occurring during that time in the height of World War II. But when we do these kinds of activities, we might really want to think about the themes of social justice in this context, because we're really thinking about how do we think about dismantling racism and systematic oppression in these resources that are so prevalent, because the voices of the Japanese American experiences are not portrayed or are not included in the Wikipedia entries. And at Fresno State, we have those documentations, we have those references and resources to help better shape the sources out there. And so that is sort of one way we were working on that in celebration, or actually not in celebration, but in memory of what had happened, but in recognizing the experiences of those who survived camps. And in the Women's History Editathon, that's a flyer from the ARLIS community, the art libraries group, and basically figuring out and identifying ways to improve Wikipedia entries of women's experiences in the content there, and having that involvement, that participation from diverse members of the community. So this way, it sort of ties in all into different interactions with the community, as well as students engaging with scholarship in a way that it helps promote reference materials or credible sources, and also really, as I mentioned, giving that authoritative sources in the entries out there. So you can see here, these are just some images I took for our 9066 Wikipedia Editathon. People were coming in and out of the room, and people were working with online sources like Credo, and also encyclopedia entries like the ones you see there. So the first step you might want to think about is, for those who, 94% of you said you haven't done it, you might want to think about creating a landing page on Wikipedia site or any other site, and then just start putting in the information there, like what's in it, why you should do it, and who's involved, and so forth. And the most important aspect, I think, is the to-do list part, which is listing the areas to improve the articles during the editathon, so people don't have to figure out what do they have to work on. There's already a list of things that they need to work on. We picked the people who were in specific movements to address the 9066 executive order, as well as people who were survivors and key players in this time period. And so when you create this kind of landing page, it really helps, and it's free. You can do one in Wikimedia, or you can just create one in your library guide. A lot of people have done that, or in a separate website. And so here are just some key themes of why and how do you sort of get this going. So community participants, from our experiences, were engaged. So they were using library materials, especially reference materials that I think a lot of people don't really use as much. It's just like sitting there. So what can we do to boost that usage and engaging people with those sources? And so using those references, as well as the online ones, can really add value to students understanding that there is research involved using print and digital collection. And when you also do a thorough scan of the gaps and missing information in digital spaces, you're really doing an audit of what's out there. And also it helps you understand that maybe you don't have the latest encyclopedia on perhaps on Asian American experience and activism. And there are books about it. And that makes you maybe want to purchase those resources because then it'll fulfill your collection gap in this topic as well. And so when you do this kind of analysis or just looking at what are the gaps within the Wikipedia entries, you want to make sure you have the resources to address those gaps. The text analysis of words in Wikipedia pages is really interesting. You have students reading it, people who are participants, and they start seeing maybe that there are biases in the descriptions or incorrect terms, and they can start fixing it. This is what the process is, what we're hoping to get to. Because, for instance, when we did one on women's history, we had a student who was working on women in Honduras, and there were some that were listed in the Wikipedia page, but it was not, there were no sources supporting it, and she was reading it as if it was just written, not necessarily as a bias view, but without any sort of substance. So she used the encyclopedias to start revising it and start citing it as a way to increase its visibility and also its credibility. And so adding reference and research content is possibly an exciting way to engage with students. Of course, it takes some time to prepare, and the instructors might not be too keen at first, but if you, I think, talk to them and ensure them that this is a practice of creating credible sources on Wikipedia and teaching students how to do research using library resources and focusing on a theme, I think this could make a really great classroom assignment, and it could be focused on social justice or issues within that. And it's something that I encourage everyone to try. This is something we've done at Fresno State, and it has been a really great innovative experience to have this dialogue, to have this common experience for everyone to be part of.
So another way that we can look into utilizing Credo to enhance social justice or to have understandings of what's going on in social justice is to engage in biographical investigations. Knowing the people who are spearheading movements or fighting for justice for certain communities, or finding out about those people is really important. And so there's several ways you can go about it. I'm going to give you a few of the different titles within Credo that will help with this, with that exploration. And so you can have students explore either terms and see if there are people associated within those terms, and I say terms, but terms or movements that have impacted social justice, or you can go the other way. And so some of those sources include the Encyclopedia of Race and Racism, the Encyclopedia of Diversity and Social Justice, the Historical Dictionary of Lesbian and Gay Liberation Movements, and the Feminist Philosophies from A to Z. And that's only a short list of some of the sources. So when you do go into some of these biographical investigations, you can get two different ways of, two different types of results. So I did it in Credo, and I look for, one of the people I looked for was Kimberly Crenshaw, who if many people don't know, Kimberly Crenshaw is an attorney who coined, an African-American attorney who coined the term intersectionality. Because she was seeing cases where there were women of color who were being tried not only based on their race or their gender, but at the intersection of both. And so when you search Kimberly Crenshaw, you end up with terms that come back, such as multiracial feminism, gender bias, and intersectionality. And so by doing that short biographical investigation, students have a way to find different associated ideas that they can also explore as a topic. On the flip side, if you were to look at, explore Malala, who is a much more popular personage in terms of being known around the world, the resources that come back are 50 speeches by important people. She has a profiles page. She has a topic page that gets into the general, the regular biographical information that you would find on very popular people. There's also a Who's Who's page.
Yep, and I wanted to add that this is a great exercise to understand that social justice didn't just occur yesterday or within, last year or whatnot. It has its roots, it has its history, trajectory. That levels of activism have been going on for some time now, and for students to understand that this is a continuum and this is a progressive stance on key issues, just really understanding that kind of lineage will really be helpful in framing the theory. So now we wanted to ask another poll here. It's basically, have you engaged students in research on social justice? And when we say engaged, we mean either helping students at the reference desk with a question, or if you've suggested a topic related to social justice, or if you've had a discussion, any forms of engagement, really broad, or have you done even an event or a workshop? And we're really curious to see what you all have voted on for this topic. All right, so the results, yes, wow, great, 82%, and no, 18%. All right, we're gonna make sure that 18% becomes 100% with the yes. But thank you again for participating in the second poll, and I will turn it to Kenya from here.
Okay, so one of the best parts of Credo Reference for me, and again, I'm biased, is this mind mapping feature. Quite often showing students how different concepts relate to each other and how they can use that to refine their research is something that I do in most classes to help them consider their topic resolution. And so it's really nice that Credo does this as well. And so plugging in ideas like social justice will not only give the students the definitions that that are used in different reference sources, but it also gives them related terms as found through Credo, related terms or related personages. And so they can also branch out in the way that they're studying through that way as well. And so social justice is one, but we can also look at white supremacy. And if we look at white supremacy, again, the idea that you don't just have to go with white supremacy, but pointing out to students that they can also look at supremacism or the Southern Poverty Law Center. They don't just have to stick with that big topic, but they can narrow down and either combine the terms, or they can look at the narrower terms or the people reflected.
I wanted to add that when the Charlottesville event happened in August, this was also during the time of Summer Bridge. I'm not sure if many of you have that program. It's where students who can get additional support, often they are underrepresented in the community, coming into the school before starting as a freshman, they get that extra support like tutoring and library research, and that's where I came in and I taught several Summer Bridge workshops. And I used this example to really demonstrate, like, if they were really interested, if they were really confused at what's going on and what does that term mean. And so we went through Credo using the mind map tool and using this exact same image you see here. And then we went around and started looking at it. And then they thought, you know, the KKK is the white supremacy, but that's actually, there are different kinds of groups. And then we started addressing the other ones, the neo-Nazis that are not listed here, but just in general that was brought up in the media. So I think this was a great opportunity to discuss how library resources such as Credo can really create this open dialogue of what's going on and having them become more aware and reflective of these incidents and difficult situations going on today. So I just wanted to, you know, share this teachable moment opportunity, because it was just sort of like, I didn't think I'd, you know, apply right there and then, but it worked out really well. And the Summer Bridge folks were really pleased, because it's hard to really discuss these conversations during the summer, especially when school's kind of really quiet and sleepy. But this kind of activity really helped them understand a bit more of how library research can help them understand their experiences and what they're seeing today. And we wanted to also discuss the idea of data literacy using Credo. So for instance, you see right here, these are just general maps of from an encyclopedia looking at male juvenile delinquents and so forth. So depending on your discipline, let's say you do teach workshops in criminology or sociology or any other social sciences, and you're thinking about ways to incorporate data literacy, you might want to look at what Credo has, like the existing content in terms of maps, graphs, and charts, and having students start critiquing or sort of understanding how the data is presented or mispresented. So this is just one example. This is more of a historical study, if you will, but it's a good way to understand that there are different ways of interpreting data and how data can be misinterpreted, right? Even in authoritative materials, or not necessarily misinterpreted, but maybe they're not included. So are we including the experiences of marginalized communities? Are we including the experiences of women in some of the data? Are they represented, and so forth? So having this kind of exercise can, again, promote a form of data literacy, but also this idea that we need to be aware of the inequities in our resources. And here's another example right here on poverty. So it's a really good example. A lot of first-year students, from my experience, are interested in doing research on a global issue. So poverty is often one of them. Another depressing one is nuclear weapons. That something happened yesterday. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's kind of like everyone's on edge. But what this indicates is that we can use some of the resources and references that are out there and start addressing the present-day experiences going on. So poverty, of course, this is looking at from an encyclopedia. You can have students learn to search for data and graphs and charts, have them find one and then interpret it with a think, pair, share activity. Basically having key questions like, what do they see? What do they think is missing? What is good about this graph? What isn't good about this graph or this data? And have them start practicing this, because now we're seeing there are apparently fabricated news and images and now statistics that we know has been going on for a while, but really helping them think critically about the social issues going on using these kinds of activities coming from the reference materials at Credo.
So we have another poll for you. And our question this time is, have you used Credo to address social justice?
So in some ways, I think this is almost similar to the third one, but it could be all kinds of engagement, and specifically using Credo.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have 22% have said yes, and 78% have said no. And I think the section of research where the person is may impact that. But now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the readings that may help you with your practice.
So here are a couple of readings that came out recently. They are really great materials. I'm sure some of you are familiar with these resources. If not, you might want to check them out. Really a big fan of the editors of these works. So the LIS, Implementing Social Justice in the LIS Classroom, is a really great series of chapters on the LIS experience in the classroom, looking at different kinds of practices that the librarians who teach other librarians or who teach other students, like important themes of social justice in children's literature, to study abroad programs. Really great chapters that can give you ideas of what people are doing today and the scholarship of social justice framework within the LIS field. And the other one, this award-winning book, Critical Library Pedagogy, is a really great set from ACRL, 2 volumes, looking at different experiences, but also they really give you, they break it down to like exercises on authority, on using podcasts to work on critical pedagogy. And I really just commend all the editors and the contributors for doing great work. And this, if you really have absolutely unsure or still uncertain how to get started, these 2 books can be really great resources for you to start thinking and start applying your practice using social justice theories.
So, information literacy and social justice, radical professional praxis. This book, it tries to nurture social justice values within information literacy sessions and courses. And the way that it does that is it reflects on our practices within the classroom to try and engage us in being more critical about what we're doing, but it also encourages the use of looking at our practices through the lens of a social justice-based perspective. And so as you're going through, some of the ideas are focused, one of the ideas that I found really interesting is the idea that librarianship should look at the work of scholars in other disciplines and how they interact with power and politics, and use those ideas to help them understand and critique the way that information literacy works within that discipline and within education generally. And so it's not only encouraging us to practice, but also be critical of the way that things are generally done. But it also, there's another section that's also really cool. It talks about community engagement. So it takes us within the classroom, but also outside of the classroom. And how do we bridge those spaces? Critical Library Instruction is another great book. It focuses on critical pedagogy, just as instruction literacy and social justice did. But in this one, there's more of an emphasis on bringing theory and practice together in library instruction. And so I feel this book was a little more practical than the first. And so there's an emphasis on really committing to social justice. And so one of the things that I really enjoyed was that there's a section that has case studies of authentic experiences of certain populations. And so you're looking into the specific lived experiences. And we talked about Wikipedia-thons. There's actually a section within this book on the use of Wikipedia in the classroom. And it gets into not only the fact that it's very popular, but the controversy surrounding the use of Wikipedia in the classroom.
And I wanted to bring up this new book. This is actually a co-edited volume that I worked with two other colleagues. It will come out in December. It's actually a really great book because, not because I worked on it, but because it captures a lot of experiences of community activism, engagement, and librarians who support the Asian American community in different ways. And so for those who are not familiar with this kind of content, it's really to indicate that the Asian Pacific Islander community is growing in the US really rapidly, according to a lot of census research and demographic studies. And so what happens is that, well, how do we support this open community and growing community, whether they are coming for help in the public libraries, which we are seeing, and also coming in as international students, mainly from China, India, and so forth. And so these case studies really integrate activism with librarianship. And there are a lot of good examples and experiences covering leadership perspectives. And in case you are a new librarian, you're interested in what people are seeing, or if you have been in the profession for quite some time and you might be curious on how other people are taking the issues of diversity or inclusivity in the field, this is a great series of essays and interviews listed. But it also cultivates a community of practice to engage with diverse communities. So it really isn't just in general Asian American communities, it's specifically, for example, the Vietnamese community in Los Angeles, or the experiences of those in the American South or in the Pacific Northwest, or in San Francisco, things like that. So it's really geographically, cuts through the geography, and it's a great book if you want to consider having it. It's really want to thank all the contributors, and if there's any listening, thanks for supporting this and working on this. And we have this resource here. I believe I'll let Kenya speak on this.
Okay, one resource that I would like to encourage you to explore is called TILE. And TILE is a research guide from Johns Hopkins University. They've featured it at several different conferences, but I don't know that it's gotten the push that it probably should. What TILE does is it gets different examples and they pull it together so that you can use within your instruction different examples that will help students think in a more inclusive way. And so, for instance, there are examples of how when you're teaching maybe a science or engineering class, ways to incorporate people who are either women or of color. And so they have examples that you can use, that you can utilize to enhance your session to make it seem that you're not just using less inclusive methods.
And we wanted to bring up this LibGuides that Credo has. In case you are subscribers to Credo, you have access to a lot of their really great LibGuides out there, and you can start thinking about integrating some of the content, like for instance, you see here on social issues and activism in different areas, environment, religion, business, so forth, and put them in your LibGuides if you have them, and really start creating a toolkit rather, or you can embed them in your existing LibGuides for writing, rhetoric, and for sheer experience, things like that, that I think could be really helpful for you to think about. So we're up into the last poll.
And we were wondering if you can recommend any other readings or resources on social justice and instruction.
And you can do this in the chat box. And I think, Kenya, do you have access to that right now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, we're really curious to hear, or if you like, you can respond to some of the resources that we recommended, and maybe you can say something about that if you like.
And yeah, I don't think you have visibility, but I'm seeing them here. One that just came up is Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
Oh yeah.
Somebody else?
Yep.
Yes, I can't see it, so sorry about that.
No worries, that's what we have so far. So it doesn't look like we have too many ideas out there, so clearly probably a lack of resources. Oh, we just see Access to Information and Social Justice by Brownlee and Walby.
So maybe we can gather a group of people together to create a research guide, or maybe we need to have more publications in this area.
Yeah.
A comment that just came through is, I think the Southern Poverty Law Center has a good source for discussing hate groups, not an academic one per se, but it tracks them and also has information on teaching tolerance.
Mm.
But there seems to be some interest in your idea, Kenya, to create a central database.
That's really interesting. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that's really interesting. I haven't thought about that. Have you?
No, but I definitely think that now is a good time for these kinds of ideas and these kinds of discussions. Unfortunately, I think right now social justice needs to have a louder voice. And so I'm not sure how we will pool that kind of resource, but it definitely needs to happen. if anyone's looking for a research project.
Yeah, we'd be curious to see, and I'm sure a lot of people have ideas and different materials to contribute. Well, thank you so much for filling out the poll. We appreciate it, or not the poll. Well, in some ways it is a poll, but for sharing the resource that you encounter. And I think one of the things we're kind of struggling with this kind of webinar is how much do we want to talk about and how much do we want to include, because it is a 1 hour webinar, and we wanted to be mindful that there are all kinds of other practices and theories to consider, like critical race theory, which we didn't even get into, or the ideas of intersectionality. I mean, there's some of that I think Kenya brought in, and we wanted to ensure that there are all these other practices and ideas and theories to consider within social justice. And so we wanted to just sort of give the final thoughts here of concluding our webinar and open up for discussion after. Wanted to encourage everyone to really draw awareness and connection of our professional work with social justice framework and the theories going on, because as I mentioned, it's a lot of injustices, a lot of difficult and challenging times at the moment, and we need to start looking back and infusing what we can do to educate our students and our community and support them in a way that helps them critically address and understand what's going on.
We also have to prepare students to engage with complex topics in society. Being uncomfortable, which a lot of these topics may make students uncomfortable, isn't really a reason to not engage in society. And I think that if our students aren't able to do so, we will end up with a less educated or engaged population. And so we need to be pushing our students to think and access information and access ideas about people who are in other situations, or about people who are oppressed, or people within communities different from their own, in ways that they're able to engage and do so respectfully, and be able to thrive within society. And
that's a great point, Kenya, and it connects back really to our core values stated in the ALA sites and pages, that we need to think about these core values and what they mean as professional librarians to us, like how we can engage and implement and really design activities and support in these areas. So for instance, this is a great opportunity to use social justice framework to design new instructional techniques, really to focus on these key issues, as Kenya pointed out, and the idea of social justice, equity, diversity, inclusivity. They're not just a broader community issue. They can be addressed in the room. This is the great learning opportunity to really have students engage with this content, and you can start applying them into different ways, like we have described, and I'm sure there are plenty other great examples. You can consider the readings that we suggested. They list different exercises and so forth. And so, like we were saying earlier, we are not necessarily the experts, but we hope this gave you some thought and hope to encourage you to think about how do you apply social justice in your instruction. So thank you again for listening, and we'll be open for questions. And if you need to go, you're welcome to email us as well.
Yes, thank you so very much for attending and for your participation. This has been rather informational for me as well.
Great, thank you both. So as I mentioned earlier, you're free to ask questions in that question box. I'll be moderating for everyone. Before I put some of the questions out, I did want to point out that Credo recently partnered with procon.org, which is also a great resource for helping students look at some of these complex topics. If you're not familiar with procon.org, they do create resources for students that show both the pro and con to various arguments, and it's a very reliable source. We've now made that available within our Credo collection, so that's another way that you can also use Credo in the coming months, and as we expand our partnership with them to help students guide through that conversation. So looking at a couple of questions, Ray, we have an attendee who's curious about the type of attendance you get at your Wikipedia edit-a-thons.
Yeah, thanks for your question. It varies. Obviously, this is, I think this coming spring semester on Women's History Month in March, we're able to actually embed the Wikipedia edit-a-thon in one of the women's studies classes with my colleague, Bang Bang, who is the women's studies librarian. And working with them, we're able to actually get a lot of input. But for those drop-in workshops, we had at least 15 people to 20 people. I think the 9066, we had about like 10. It's a modest and conservative number. However, considering that our library has never done it and we don't necessarily think about these issues, but we could, and that's what I've been trying to encourage and reinforce. It's a really good way to start the dialogue and start doing this more on a normal practical basis. But I will say that if you have refreshment, it is a great draw. If you're able to work closely, which is what I'm going to do actually this coming December, with faculty who are, who have classes set up for the spring, start working with them and asking them if they're willing to either send students over for extra credit for the drop-in, or if you can actually do it in one of their classes. And the faculty I've met with have been receptive, at least for me to discuss and align the workshop with their class dates. I hope that gave you some ideas to think about.
Great. We had a question related, Kenya, to your idea of aggregating resources, and thought is, maybe do we know if the tile effort out of Johns Hopkins might be willing to host an aggregation of the resources? Would you have any thoughts on that?
I believe that they may. I can reach, I believe they may. We would have to reach out to them to see if they would be willing to. But I'm sure that there are people who are within the profession. I'm sure that we can pool quite a few people. The key is trying to, I think it would be a massive project. And so it may be something that, depending on who we get involved with, we may want to apply for a grant to do. Because I definitely think there are a lot of resources. As we were speaking, I just looked at how many social justice research guides there are, and there are 8 million. So pooling what could be used in could be a huge process, but I do think it would be a worthy process. I do think Tile, the people who were involved with Tile may be willing to do so, and I can reach out to them, and if you give me a second, I'm going to bring up their research guide, because we would just have to reach out and see what their time looks like as well.
Yeah, well, there you go. That could be a call out to the wider group as well. Obviously, there's a need, so they must have some contact information there. That's a great idea, so we can start to lobby that group and see if they'd be interested in taking on that particular project as well.
And so...
Great. As a matter of time, I'm going to move on to a few more questions, but Kenya, if you do have that information, you can send it to us. We can put it out into the chat for everyone.
Okay. Yes, here's the link to their research guide, and there's actually an email address to the person who is collecting information that gets added, and they would be, I think, the first contact to see if they'd be willing to do that.
All right, great. Let me just put that out to the group right now. Looks like it'll be easier for me to paste it than to read it out. So there you go. All right, we did have a couple questions about people who are interested in the slides. So the survey that I mentioned that you'll receive after the webinar does ask you if you're interested in receiving the presentation today. So just click yes, and we'll make sure to email that to you. So great to see so much interest in the presentation. Other questions? Let's see. What supports do you suggest for helping us as professionals to facilitate these hard conversations, to keep things on even keel rather than inflame? Would either of you have thoughts on that?
I was just going to say, I'll take on this one first. I think UCLA did something recently. A colleague and friend of mine, Annie Pho, she tweeted something on Twitter about UCLA libraries having these conversation tables. I need to actually follow up with her what they did, but I see that they were drawing people in and having discussions from different experiences, and that seems like a really light way, but also an interesting way to get people involved and engaged. That's all I wanted to share, actually.
Ray and I went to a conference together. Last year it was the Diversity in Libraries Conference, National Diversity in Libraries Conference, and the ending keynote was a discussion between the director of MIT Libraries and one of the librarians at
was it NYU?
NYU, yes. Sorry about that. Yeah. April Hathcock. And what was interesting was the conversation that we saw in front of us was the continuation of a conversation they'd been having on Twitter. And so I would suggest using your social media to a certain effect to see the conversations that are happening between librarians. And so critlib.org is one of the sections. And one of the things that was emphasized is listening to the communities that are impacted. Let them speak, let them tell you what's going on, and then engage in conversation. And so I think, I guess, seeking out some of those conversations, I would definitely start with CritLib. And on that site, there are the administrators of that site, their contact information is there. And so they will also share resources. And I believe there are resources within that site also to facilitate discussion. Does that sound right, Ray?
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah. I know we are sort of running out of time. Is there one more question, or?
We hit them all, so I think we're good. Perfect. So thank you again, everyone, and thank you very much, Ray and Kenya. Just a reminder, you will receive a recording of the webinar within 24 hours, and we have that survey coming to you in a moment, as well as in the email. And if you are interested in our last webinar of the year, we do have our final webinar of our webinar series with both Ray Pun again and Kate Angel, who will be hosting Assessing First-Year Students, a conversation on assessment techniques. So if you're available on Wednesday, December 13th, or would like to receive the recording of the webinar, please do follow the link to register. And we're looking forward to that final session. So thank you again, and we hope to see you on December 13th.